Last was Hercule Poirot, emerging from a polished Rolls-Royce, his moustache immaculate, his suit a testament to order. He bowed slightly to the gathered crowd, his accent crisp. "Messieurs et mesdames, fear not. Poirot's little grey cells shall bring clarity to this chaos." He clutched a notebook, ready to dissect the human heart. The police captain, sweating under pressure, briefed them quickly. Victor Langston, dead, stabbed, no weapon, no entry, no exit. 5 suspects, Elise, Marcus, Gregory, Nora, Clara, all confined to the manor. No clear motive, no obvious lies, but plenty of whispers. The captain looked from one detective to the other, hoping for miracles. Holmes was already at the study door, testing the lock with a frown. Poirot scanned the guests, his gaze lingering on their nervous hands. Blanc, though, just leaned against a pillar, sipping his coffee, watching the scene like a play he'd seen before. "Something tells me," Blanc said softly, almost to himself, "this ain't as locked as it looks." His smile was small, knowing, and it sent a shiver through the air. The others didn't hear him. They were too busy with their own plans. Holmes wanted evidence. Poirot wanted motives, but Blanc? He wanted the truth, and he had a funny feeling it was closer than anyone thought. The manor seemed to hold its breath. 5 suspects, 3 detectives, 1 impossible murder. Ravenwood's walls had seen secrets before, but none like this. The game was on, and Benoit Blanc was already playing by his own rules. Chapter 2. Clues in the Shadows. The morning after Victor Langston's murder, Ravenwood Manor felt like a house holding its breath. The storm had calmed to a drizzle, but the air inside was heavy, thick with suspicion and the faint creak of old wood. The police had cordoned off the study, its broken door a silent accusation, while the 5 suspects, Elise, Marcus, Gregory, Nora, and Clara, waited in the grand hall, their faces a mix of grief, fear, and something harder to name. Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot stood apart, each man a world unto himself, ready to unravel the impossible. Holmes moved first, as if drawn by some invisible thread. He circled the study's threshold, his fingers brushing the splintered doorframe where the police had forced entry. The lock, he noted, was a beast, custom-made, no signs of tampering, the kind that laughed at picks and prayers. He knelt, his eyes narrowing at a faint scuff on the carpet, barely a whisper of dirt. "Fibres," he muttered, pinching a tiny thread between his fingers. "Wool, expensive, not from the staff." His gaze darted to a corner where a broken cufflink lay, half hidden under a bookshelf, its gold edge catching the dim light. To Holmes, the room was a map, every inch a clue to the killer's path. He began sketching a timeline in his mind. Entry, strike, escape, all of it trapped in a room that refused to speak. Poirot, meanwhile, had no patience for dust and threads. He stood in the hall, his notebook open, his pen a metronome of precision. The suspects sat before him, summoned one by one, their voices tight under his stare. Elise spoke of her father's vision, her words polished, but her hands twisting a handkerchief. "He was my mentor," she said, though her eyes flicked away too quickly. Marcus leaned back, all charm, claiming he'd been in the library discussing deals when Victor vanished. "Tragic, really," he sighed, but his smile lingered like a stain. Gregory, stiff as ever, swore he'd been clearing plates all night, his loyalty to Victor a shield. Nora rambled about art and fate, her fingers smudged with charcoal, her story a maze of half-truths. Clara was the quietest, her answers short, her past a blank page. "I barely knew him," she said, and Poirot's moustache twitched. He smelled a lie. To him, the truth hid in their hearts, in the flicker of a glance, or the pause before a word. Benoit Blanc, though, was nowhere near the study or the suspects. He'd wandered to the Manor's control room, a sleek nook tucked behind the kitchen, where Ravenwood's AI assistant Echelon hummed quietly. The police had ignored it, too new, too strange, but Blanc felt at home among the screens. He tapped a panel, his coffee cup balanced on the edge, and scrolled through system logs with a hum. "Well now, what's this?" he said, his drawl soft but sharp. At 11:58 p.m., just before Victor's last sighting, Echelon had recorded a power surge, brief but odd, spiking in the study's grid. Nothing major, no lights flickered, no alarms tripped, but enough to make Blanc's brow lift. He cross-checked the Manor's devices and stopped cold. Victor's smartwatch, always on his wrist, was missing from the crime scene. No one had mentioned it, not the police, not the suspects. "A man like that don't lose his toys," Blanc murmured, his mind already spinning threads the others couldn't see. Back in the hall, the detectives crossed paths, their methods brushing like ships in a fog. Holmes emerged from the study, his coat dusted with lint, clutching a mental catalogue of clues. Fibres, cufflink, a faint cigar scent that didn't match Victor's brand. He glanced at Poirot, who was scribbling notes on Elise's nervous tick. "The daughter's hiding something," Poirot said, his voice low. "Her grief is theatrical." Holmes nodded curtly. "The cufflink's not hers. Likely male, likely wealthy." They shared a look, two minds aligned in purpose, but not in path. Neither noticed Blanc slipping back into the hall, his coffee cup now empty, his eyes bright with something new. Jim. Suspects watched from their chairs, restless under the weight of scrutiny. Elise whispered to Marcus, her voice sharp, accusing him of dodging questions. Marcus laughed it off, but his hand tightened on his glass. Gregory stood by the door, his posture rigid, as if guarding more than the room. Nora sketched the detectives now, her pencil carving Blanc's fedora with eerie detail. Clara stayed apart, her gaze fixed on the floor, but her fingers tapped a rhythm only she understood. Blanc leaned against a pillar, letting the hall's chatter wash over him. He didn't need to prod or pry, not yet. Holmes was chasing shadows. On the floor, Poirot was hunting lies in words. But Blanc saw something else. The Manor wasn't just walls and secrets. It was alive with tech, with data, with truths nobody thought to check. That power surge, that missing smartwatch, they weren't answers, but they were doors. And Benoit Blanc loved an open door. As noon approached, the police captain cornered the detectives, his face lined with worry. "Anything?" he asked, voice tight. Holmes rattled off his findings, Faber's cufflinks sent, each a piece of a puzzle he'd solve alone. Poirot closed his notebook, promising motives would soon surface, clear as day. Blanc just smiled, slow and easy. "Oh, we're getting there, Captain. Just gotta listen to what ain't talking." The captain frowned, unsure, but the other detectives barely glanced his way. They had their plans, their clues, their truths, but Blanc knew something they didn't. The shadows held more than fibres or lies. They held secrets only a modern eye could catch. And he was already one step ahead. Chapter 3. The Tangled Web of Motives. The afternoon sun barely pierced Ravenwood Manor's heavy curtains, casting long shadows across the grand hall where suspicion hung like dust. Victor Langston's murder remained a locked-room enigma, and the 5 suspects, Elise, Marcus, Gregory, Nora, and Clara, sat under the weight of 3 unrelenting gazes. Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot had begun their hunt, each carving a path through the chaos. But the truth was still a knot nobody could untie. By now, the air crackled with questions. Who wanted Victor dead? And why? Sherlock. Holmes prowled the manor's edges, his mind a machine grinding through details. The cufflink and carpet fibres from the study were his anchors, but he needed more. He'd slipped into Victor's office, a room adjacent to the study, rifling through papers with surgical precision. Ledgers, contracts, scribbled notes, nothing obvious, but a pattern emerged. Victor had been shifting funds, millions, into offshore accounts tied to Marcus Kane's name. Holmes's jaw tightened as he traced a timeline on a stolen sheet of paper. Marcus had been in the library during the murder window, or so he claimed, but the cufflink, gold, monogrammed with an M, whispered otherwise. Holmes didn't trust whispers, though. He needed proof, and he'd tear the manor apart to find it. Hercule Poirot, ever the observer of souls, had turned the dining room into his stage. He paced before the suspects, his polished shoes clicking on the parquet floor, his notebook now thick with secrets. He'd moved past simple alibis, digging into motives with a surgeon's touch. Elise, Victor's daughter, spoke of legacy, but Poirot caught the edge in her voice. Resentment, maybe, over years in her father's shadow. He trusted me to lead, she insisted, but her fingers shredded a napkin as she spoke. Marcus deflected with charm, admitting to business disputes, but framing them as petty. Victor and I argued, sure, but kill him. Absurd, he laughed, though his eyes didn't. Gregory, the butler, was a wall of duty, claiming Victor was family, not just a boss. But Poirot noted his clenched fists when Elise's name came up. Nora, the artist, spun tales of Victor's dark side, rumours of blackmail, ruined lives. But her passion felt too raw, too personal. Clara remained a cipher, answering in clipped sentences, her history a void. I was here for the gala. Nothing more, she said, but Poirot's little grey cells hummed. She was hiding something big. Benoit Blanc, as usual, danced to his own tune, while Holmes chased paper trails and Poirot dissected words. Blanc had found a new toy. Marcus Kane's phone, left carelessly on a hall table during a coffee break. The police hadn't bothered with it, too focused on the study, but Blanc's curiosity was a living thing. He didn't pick the lock or hack the screen. He just asked a junior officer for a favour, all southern charm and winks. By noon, he was in a quiet parlour, scrolling through a digital forensics report the officer had pulled. Marcus's phone held a treasure, deleted text messages sent hours before the murder, recovered from a cloud backup. One read, V knows too much, tonight. Another to an unknown number, study, midnight. The timestamps lined up with Victor's last moments. Blanc leaned back, whistling softly. "Well, ain't that a plot twist?" he said, his voice low enough to blend with the manor's hum. The suspects, unaware of Blanc's find, were fraying at the edges. Elise cornered, Marcus near the staircase, her voice a hiss. "You're lying about the deal, aren't you? Father never trusted you." Marcus brushed her off, but his laugh was thin, his glance darting to the police guarding the hall. Gregory hovered nearby, polishing a candelabra with unnecessary force, his eyes flicking between Elise and the detectives. Nora had retreated to a corner, her sketches now littered with fractured faces, Victor's, Clara's, her own. Clara sat alone, her hands folded, but her foot tapped a nervous rhythm, as if counting seconds to escape. Holmes and Poirot reconvened briefly, their paths crossing in the library. Holmes shared his discovery, Victor's secret accounts, Marcus's name all over them. Kane's involved, but the how eludes me, he admitted. His tone clipped. Poirot nodded, his moustache twitching. The daughter, Elise, she burns with ambition, but her lies are clumsy. And the butler, too loyal perhaps. They agreed to watch Marcus and Elise closely, but neither mentioned Clara or Nora, their theories still forming. Blanc wasn't there. He was still in the parlour, turning the texts over in his mind, wondering who V was and why tonight felt so final. The police captain, growing impatient, pressed the detectives for progress as the afternoon waned. Holmes laid out his clues. Cufflink, fibres, financial trails, each a brick in a wall he'd built alone. Poirot spoke of broken alibis and hidden grudges, promising clarity soon. Blanc, strolling in late, offered only a shrug and a grin. "Folks, it's like a bad novel. Everyone's got a reason to hate somebody. Just gotta find the right page." The captain scowled, but Holmes and Poirot barely glanced his way, lost in their own worlds. Blanc didn't mind. He'd seen the texts, felt their weight. They weren't the whole story, not yet, but they were a crack in the manor's facade. Holmes had his papers. Poirot had his people. But Blanc had something alive, something digital, something that pulsed with intent. The suspects were a web, tangled and tight, and those messages were the first thread to pull. As the clock struck 4, the manor seemed to tighten its grip. The suspects shifted in their seats. The detectives sharpened their tools, and somewhere in the shadows, the truth waited, closer than anyone but Blanc could guess. Chapter 4. The ghost of Ravenwood dusk settled over Ravenwood Manor like a heavy cloak, the kind that muffled sound and sharpened fear. Victor Langston's murder still hung unresolved, a locked-room riddle that mocked every theory. The grand hall, once alive with gala chatter, now felt hollow. Its 5 suspects, Elise, Marcus, Gregory, Nora, and Clara, trapped in a dance of glances and silences. Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot pressed on, their methods pulling them in different directions. But the manor seemed to push back, guarding its truths with an almost human stubbornness. By the second evening, something new stirred. In the shadows, a whisper that wasn't there before. The staff had started it, though nobody could pin down who. A maid swore she'd seen Victor's silhouette in the east wing, gliding past a mirror after midnight. A groundskeeper claimed the study's chandelier flickered when no one was near. By dinner, the rumours had spread, infecting the suspects like a fever. Elise scoffed, calling it nonsense, but her voice cracked when she said it. Marcus laughed too loudly, joking about haunted houses, though he kept checking over his shoulder. Gregory, ever stoic, said nothing, but his hands trembled as he poured wine. Nora leaned into the story, her eyes bright, muttering about restless spirits and unfinished business. Clara, as always, stayed quiet, her face unreadable, but she lingered near the hall's exits as if ready to bolt. Sherlock Holmes heard the talk and dismissed it with a wave. Ghosts were distractions, unworthy of his logic. He'd moved his focus to the manor's layout, sketching floor plans in a corner of the library. The study's impossible lock gnawed at him. Fibres and cufflinks were useful, but they didn't explain entry or exit. He traced walls and vents, calculating trajectories, convinced the answer lay in structure, not superstition. A hidden panel, a forgotten duct, something tangible. He barely noticed the suspect's growing unease, their whispers irrelevant against the cold math of his mind. "The dead don't walk," he snapped when a constable mentioned the rumours, his pen scratching harder against the page. Hercule Poirot, too, had little time for phantoms, but he saw something else in the gossip. To him, it was a mirror, a reflection of guilt or fear. He gathered the staff in the parlour, his voice gentle but unyielding, probing their tales. The maid admitted her sighting came after a long shift, her eyes tired. The groundskeeper hedged, saying shadows played tricks. Poirot's moustache curved slightly. He knew fear could twist truth, but it could also crack lies. He watched the suspects more closely now, noting how Nora's ghost talk stirred the others. Elise argued with her, voice rising as if the idea offended her control. Marcus humoured Nora, but avoided her gaze. Gregory polished glasses nearby, silent but listening too intently. Clara said nothing, yet Poirot caught her staring at the study door. Her fingers knotted tight. To Poirot, the ghost was a symbol, not a spirit, and it pointed to someone's breaking point. Benoit Blanc, predictably, took a different road. While Holmes measured walls and Poirot chased motives, Blanc drifted back to the manor's control room, where Echelon's screens glowed like a confession waiting to happen. The ghost rumours amused him. He'd heard worse in his time, but they nudged a thought. If people saw shadows, maybe the manor's eyes had too. He pulled up security footage, hours of grainy feeds the police had skimmed and ignored. Most showed nothing, empty halls, locked doors, but one clip, time-stamped 12:03 a.m. on the murder night, made him pause. A figure, cloaked in shadow, moved past the study's outer hall, too quick to identify but too real to dismiss. The shape was slight, deliberate, and it vanished into a stairwell. Blanc rewound, watched again, his lips curling into a half-smile. "Well, hello there," he murmured, noting the figure's path didn't match any suspect's alibi. Not Elise's, not Marcus's, not even Clara's, though her frame seemed closest. He cross-checked the footage against Echelon's logs, the same system that flagged the power surge the night before. No new surges, but a tiny glitch caught his eye. A camera in the East Wing had blinked offline for 3 seconds at 12:04 a.m., right after the figure passed. Not enough to prove tampering, but enough to make Blanc's fingers tap the desk. He didn't think it was a ghost, but he didn't think it was careless either. Someone knew the manor's blind spots, and that someone wasn't sleeping. The suspects felt the shift, though they couldn't name it. Dinner was tense, forks scraping plates like warnings. Elise snapped at Nora to stop her ghost nonsense, her patience frayed. "You're making fools of us all," she said, but her eyes darted to the darkened windows. Marcus tried to lighten the mood, raising a glass to Victor's restless soul, but the joke landed flat, and he drained his wine too fast. Gregory served in silence, his face a mask, though he spilled a drop of sauce. A rare mistake. Nora sketched the table now, her lines jagged, capturing the group's unease. Clara ate little, her gaze fixed on the hall, as if expecting something to step out of it. The detectives didn't dine. They worked. Holmes, still buried in blueprints, muttered about impossible angles, his focus absolute. Poirot lingered near the suspects, catching every flinch, every sidelong glance, building a map of their fears. Blanc stayed in the control room a while, longer, saving the footage to a thumb drive, his mind turning over the shadowy figure. He rejoined the others late, slipping into the hall with a nod, his calm unshaken. The police captain cornered them again, voice sharp with frustration. "Ghosts now? Is that what we're chasing?" Holmes ignored him, scribbling measurements. Poirot offered a cryptic smile, saying only, "The mind conjures what the heart cannot face." Blanc chuckled, hands in pockets. "Captain, I reckon the only thing haunting this place is a bad decision or two." The manor didn't care for their answers. Its walls seemed to lean closer as night deepened, the rumours growing legs. The suspects whispered among themselves, Elise accusing Marcus of stirring trouble, Nora insisting the manor held grudges, Clara saying nothing but listening too well. Gregory cleared the table with mechanical precision, his eyes avoiding the study door. Somewhere in the dark, that fleeting figure from the footage lingered, not a ghost, but a clue, one Blanc alone had seen. The truth was tightening its grip, and Ravenwood Manor was starting to crack. Chapter 5. The Second Strike. The third day at Ravenwood Manor dawned grey and restless, as if the house itself were tiring of its secrets. Victor Langston's murder remained unsolved, a locked-room puzzle that taunted the sharpest minds. Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot, the five suspects, Elise, Marcus, Gregory, Nora, and Clara, moved like pieces on a fractured board, their every word and glance weighed by suspicion. Ghost rumours still lingered in the halls, but something darker was brewing, something that would shatter the fragile calm before noon. The morning began quietly, with the suspects scattered across the manor under police watch. Elise, Victor's daughter, sat in the library, poring over her father's journals, her face tight with determination to protect, or perhaps claim, his legacy. Marcus lingered in the billiard room, spinning tales of innocence to anyone who'd listen, his charm fraying at the edges. Gregory, the butler, tended to his duties with mechanical precision, though his eyes darted to every shadow. Nora sketched alone in the conservatory, her drawings now chaotic swirls of fear and fire. Clara kept to the edges, her silence louder than ever. her hands fidgeting with a locket she hadn't worn before. Sherlock Holmes had barely slept, his focus locked on the manor's architecture. He'd spent the night measuring the study's walls, convinced a hidden passage explained the impossible crime. By breakfast, he'd found something. A blueprint discrepancy in the manor's west wing, suggesting a sealed room near the study. He slipped away to investigate, prying at panels with a pocket knife, his mind racing. The fibres, the cufflink, the financial trails, they all pointed somewhere, but without entry or exit, they were incomplete. A secret room could change everything, and Holmes was betting his logic on it. He didn't care about the ghost talk or the suspect's nerves. To him, the manor was a machine, and he'd find its gears. Hercule Poirot, meanwhile, was weaving a different net. The ghost rumours had sharpened his instincts, revealing cracks in the suspects' facades. He'd begun cross-referencing their statements, building a timeline of contradictions. Elise claimed she'd been in her room at midnight, but a maid recalled her near the study. Marcus swore he'd stayed in the library, yet his shoes carried mud from the garden. Gregory's alibi held, but his devotion to Victor felt too fierce, almost desperate. Nora's stories grew wilder, hinting at grudges nobody else confirmed. Clara's past remained blank, her answers too neat. Poirot sat in the parlour, his notebook a battlefield, circling patterns only he could see. "The killer fears discovery," he murmured, "and fear makes mistakes." Benoit Blanc, as ever, followed his own rhythm. The camera footage from the night before, that shadowy figure, had set his mind buzzing, but he needed more. He'd returned to the manor's control room, where Echelon's data waited like an old friend. The missing smartwatch, noted days ago, was still a loose thread, and Blanc had a hunch it wasn't gone for good. He dug into Echelon's cloud sync logs, cross-referencing Victor's devices. Most were offline, phone, laptop, tablet, but the smartwatch had pinged the cloud at 12:01 a.m., moments after the murder window. A single file had uploaded, encrypted, but its metadata held a gift. A notification log with one message, time-stamped, 11:59 p.m. It read, "Trust no one." Blanc leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Now, Victor, who spooked you so bad?" he said, his drawl laced with curiosity. Before Blanc could dig deeper, chaos erupted. A scream tore through the manor, sharp and raw, from the library. Elise stumbled into the hall, clutching her arm, blood seeping through her sleeve. "Someone pushed me," she gasped, her eyes wide with panic. A heavy bronze statue lay toppled near the library shelves, its base smeared with red. The police rushed in, the suspects trailing, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion. Marcus was first to speak, his voice too smooth. "My God, Elise, are you all right?" Gregory hovered silently, his knuckles white. Nora muttered about curses, her sketchbook forgotten. Clara stared at the statue, her locket now tucked away. Holmes emerged from the west wing, annoyed at the interruption, but his eyes scanned the scene with cold precision. He noted the statue's weight, too heavy for an accident, and the angle of its fall, suggesting force from behind. No footprints, no fingerprints, but a faint scuff on the floor caught his attention, similar to the study's carpet mark. He filed it away, his secret room theory still his focus, though Elise's attack gnawed at him. A second strike meant urgency, and urgency meant errors, by the killer or himself. Poirot arrived moments later, his calm unshaken. He knelt beside Elise, now bandaged by a constable, and listened to her story. She'd been alone, reading, when she felt a shove and heard footsteps fading. No face, no voice, just a blur of motion. Poirot's questions were gentle but sharp. Had she argued with anyone, seen anything odd? Elise shook her head, but her glance at Marcus lingered too long. Poirot turned to the others, watching their reactions. Marcus protested innocence, Gregory offered nothing, Nora rambled about fate, and Clara's silence felt heavier than ever. To Poirot, the attack was a message, but for whom? Blanc joined last, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. He'd just heard the scream from the control room and pieced together the basics before arriving. Elise's injury wasn't fatal, a graze more warning than murder, but it changed the game. He listened as the police questioned her, noting how Marcus hovered, how Gregory avoided eye contact, how Nora's words tumbled too fast. Clara's stillness stood out most. She wasn't shocked, not really. Blanc's mind flicked back to the smartwatch message. Trust no one. It wasn't just Victor's fear, it was a warning for everyone, and someone hadn't heeded it. The police captain stormed in, his patience gone. Another attack? In broad daylight, he barked, glaring at the detectives. Holmes, brushing dust from his coat, promised the manor's secrets would crack soon. Poirot, closing his notebook, said the killer's mask was slipping, and he'd catch it. Blanc, leaning against a bookshelf, gave a slow nod. Captain, folks don't swing. Statues for fun. Someone's getting nervous. His tone was light, but his eyes were locked on the suspects, reading them like a book he'd already half finished. The manor felt smaller now, its holes tighter, its shadows deeper. Elise, patched up, refused to rest, her defiance brittle. Marcus laughed off the tension, but his jokes fell flat. Gregory resumed his duties, his movements stiff. Nora's sketches turned darker, all jagged lines and eyes. Clara slipped away to her room, unnoticed by most, but not by Blanc. The smartwatch clue burned in his mind, its message a thread he'd pull soon. Holmes chased his hidden room, Poirot his patterns, but Blanc knew the truth wasn't just in walls or words, it was in the spaces nobody looked. Ravenwood's clock ticked on, and the killer's shadow grew longer. Chapter 6. The Alibi That Crumbled. The fourth day at Ravenwood Manor broke with a tension that felt alive, coiling tighter with every passing hour. Victor Langston's murder, still unsolved, cast a long shadow, and Elise's attack the day before had turned suspicion into a blade, cutting through the manor's fragile calm. The 5 suspects, Elise, Marcus, Gregory, Nora, and Clara, were fraying, their masks slipping under the relentless scrutiny of Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot. The air hummed with unspoken accusations, and by midday, one lie would crack wide open. The morning found the suspects restless, confined to the manor's west wing under police orders. Elise, her arm bandaged from the statue's graze, paced the drawing room, her voice sharp as she demanded answers. "Someone's playing games," she snapped, her eyes darting to Marcus, who lounged nearby, deflecting with a grin. Marcus leaned back, spinning a pen, insisting he'd been nowhere near the library during the attack. "I was with Gregory. Ask him," he said, too smooth, too practiced. Gregory, polishing a silver tray, nodded curtly, his face blank, but his shoulders stiff. Nora sat by a window, her sketches abandoned, muttering about patterns only she saw. Eyes in the walls, she claimed. Clara was the quietest, curled in an armchair, her locket clutched tight, her answers to police questions short and cold. The manor felt like a trap, and everyone was waiting for the snap. Sherlock Holmes was undeterred by the attack's chaos, his focus razor-sharp. The scuff mark from the library floor echoed the study's carpet, a thread he couldn't ignore. He'd abandoned his secret room hunt for now, convinced it was a dead end, and turned to the suspect's possessions. In a spare moment, he'd searched Marcus's coat, hung carelessly in the hall, and found a cigar stub, same brand as the study's faint scent. It wasn't proof, but it was a link, tying Marcus closer to the crime scene than his alibi allowed. Holmes stood in the corridor, his mind mapping connections, cufflink, fibres, cigar, finances. But the attack on Elise didn't fit neatly. Was it a second killer, a distraction, or a mistake? He needed more, and he'd find it, even if it meant tearing through every closet in Ravenwood. Hercule Poirot saw the attack as a spark, igniting hidden truths. He'd shifted his approach, pairing his timeline with body language, watching the suspects like a hawk. Elise's anger felt genuine, but her glances at Marcus carried weight. Resentment, maybe fear. Marcus's charm was cracking, his laughs too forced, his alibi tied to Gregory too convenient. Gregory himself was a fortress, but Poirot caught a flicker when asked about Clara. His jaw tightened just for a second. Nora's ramblings had turned inward, her talk of eyes now a plea for someone to listen. Clara, though, was Poirot's puzzle. Her silence wasn't fear, it was control, and her locket, clutched during Elise's attack, was new. He cornered her briefly, asking about her gala invitation. "A friend of Victor's," she said, but her pause was too long. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed. Clara was a lock, and he'd find the key. Benoit Blanc, true to form, was chasing a different thread. The smartwatch's trust no one message had lit a fire in him, but he needed to tie it to someone real. The shadowy figure from the camera footage pointed at Clara, her frame, her gait, but her alibi was ironclad. She'd been in the guest wing, confirmed by Echelon's door logs at the murder's time. Blanc didn't buy it. He slipped back to the control room, where Echelon's data waited like a patient witness. Digging into the manor's smart lock system, he found something curious. Clara's guest room lock had logged her entry at 11:50 p.m., but the code used wasn't hers. It was an override, one only staff or tech-savvy hands could pull off. The log had been scrubbed, but not well enough. A backup showed the tampering time-stamped just after the camera's glitch. Blanc's lips twitched. "Ain't no lock smarter than a liar," he said, his voice a low hum. He didn't confront Clara, not yet. Instead, he watched her at lunch, where the suspects ate in strained silence. Elise picked at her food, her anger simmering. Marcus joked about the manor's cooking, but his eyes scanned the room. wary. Gregory served with his usual precision, though he lingered near Clara's chair. Nora stared at her plate, whispering about traps. Clara ate calmly, her locket hidden now, but Blanc saw her glance at Marcus, quick, sharp, not friendly. It was enough to nudge him. He pulled a constable aside, asking for a quiet check on Clara's belongings. By mid-afternoon, the constable returned with a bombshell. A tiny USB drive in Clara's bag, holding a single file. A hacking script for smart locks. Blanc called a meeting in the drawing room, casual as ever, but his words were a blade. "Miss Wren," he said, fixing Clara with a gentle smile, "care to explain why your doors tell in tales?" He laid out the lock override, the scrubbed log, the USB drive. The room froze. Elise gasped. Marcus leaned forward. Gregory's tray clattered slightly. Nora's eyes widened as if seeing her sketches come alive. Clara didn't flinch, but her voice was ice. "You're wrong," she said. "I didn't touch the locks." Then a twist. She pointed at Marcus. "Ask him about his late-night calls. He's not as clean as he thinks." Marcus paled, his charm gone, stammering a denial. Holmes, standing by the door, frowned at the new lead. The cigar stub tied Marcus to the study, but hacking wasn't his style. Or was it? Poirot, seated nearby, tilted his head, intrigued. Clara's deflection was bold, but her lock-lie was broken, and Marcus's reaction wasn't innocent. Both detectives adjusted their mental maps, but Blanc's move had outpaced them. The police captain, red-faced, demanded clarity. Holmes offered, his cigar clue hinting at Marcus. Poirot noted Clara's locket, a crack in her armour. Blanc just shrugged, his smile serene. "Folks, we're peeling in the onion now. Just gotta see who cries first." The suspects scattered, rattled. Elise confronted Marcus, her voice low and fierce. Gregory resumed his work, but his hands shook. Nora sketched Clara now, her lines frantic. Clara retreated, her calm frayed, her accusation against Marcus hanging like smoke. Marcus, cornered, laughed it off, but his eyes betrayed him. Fear, not confidence. Blanc watched it all. The USB drive's weight in his pocket. The alibi was dust, but the truth was still a step away. Ravenwood Manor's walls seemed to whisper, now, not of ghosts, but of choices. The game had shifted, and Blanc's quiet step echoed loudest. Chapter 7. The Hidden Truth in Plain Sight. The fifth day at Ravenwood Manor carried a weight that pressed against every soul within its walls. Victor Langston's murder, now 4 days cold, remained a locked-room enigma, compounded by Elise's attack and Clara's broken alibi. The 5 suspects, Elise, Marcus, Gregory, Nora, and Clara, were shadows of themselves, their secrets unravelling under the relentless pursuit of Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot. Clara's accusation against Marcus had lit a spark, and by noon the manor felt like a powder keg, waiting for a single truth to blow it apart. The suspects were confined to the manor's east wing, their movements watched by weary police. Elise sat in the morning room, her bandage fresh, but her patience gone, scribbling notes as if she could rewrite her father's death. Marcus paced the corridor, his usual charm replaced by a nervous edge, muttering denials to himself about Clara's claims. Gregory, ever the butler, served tea with robotic calm, though his eyes lingered on the suspects, searching for something unspoken. Nora had retreated inward, her sketches now littering the floor. Fractured faces, Victor's among them, staring back like accusations. Clara was a statue, seated by a window, her locket gone, her defiance brittle after Blanc's exposé of her hacked lock. The manor's silence was a scream, and everyone felt it. Sherlock Holmes was closing in, his logic a blade honed sharper with each dead end. The cigar stub from Marcus's coat was a solid link to the study, but Clara's USB drive had thrown him. He'd returned to Victor's office, digging deeper into the financial records he'd found earlier. A pattern emerged. Victor had been funneling money through shell companies, but not just with Marcus. Elise's name appeared in coded memos tied to a takeover bid she'd never mentioned. Holmes cross-checked dates. The transfers spiked weeks before the murder, suggesting betrayal. He stood among scattered papers, his mind racing. The cufflink, the fibres, the cigar. They painted Marcus as careless. But Elise's ambition was a motive too clear to ignore. The attack on her muddied things, was she victim or player? Holmes needed one more piece, and he'd find it, even if it meant dismantling Ravenwood's lies brick by brick. Hercule Poirot saw the manor as a chessboard, every move revealing intent. Clara's accusation against Marcus had shifted his focus, but he trusted neither fully. He'd taken to observing the suspects in pairs, catching their unguarded moments. Elise and Marcus argued in hushed tones, her anger real but calculated, his defences too quick. Gregory, when serving Nora, lingered too long, his posture less servant than sentinel. Nora herself spoke of Victor's greed, claiming he'd crushed her dreams years ago, but her tears felt rehearsed. Clara, now exposed, was colder, her glances at Gregory sharp with meaning Poirot couldn't yet place. He revisited his notes, timelines tightening. Marcus's muddy shoes, Elise's late-night wander, Clara's locket, Gregory's flinch. The attack on Elise was no accident, he decided. It was a warning, and the sender was still here, hiding in plain sight. Benoit Blanc, as always, moved like a man who'd already read the ending. The smartwatch's trust no one message was his North Star, but it needed context. Clara's hacked lock and Marcus's late-night calls were threads, but they weren't the weave. He slipped back to the control room. Echelon screens his canvas. The smartwatch data, synced to the cloud, held more than a warning. He cracked its encryption with a borrowed police tool, revealing a hidden audio file. Victor's voice, low and tense, recorded hours before his death. They think I don't see it, but I do. The deals, the lies, it's all coming apart. Blanc's eyes narrowed. Victor had known someone was closing in, and he'd named no names, smart, scared, or both. The file's metadata pointed to a cloud folder, logged but traceable, holding bank records. Blanc dug deeper and hit gold. Victor had been running a blackmail scheme, skimming millions from Elise's takeover, Marcus's deals, even Nora's gallery funds. The folder named them all, with dates and threats. Blanc didn't stop there. He pivoted to the manor's old landline, a relic the police had ignored. Echelon logged every call, and one stood out. Outgoing 11:45 p.m., murder night, from a study extension to an unlisted number. It lasted 10 seconds, no voice recorded, but the timing screamed intent. Victor, or someone using his line, had reached out just before the knife fell. Blanc cross-checked the number. It bounced to a burner. Dead now, but its signal had pinged a tower outside Ravenwood. Someone had help. Someone beyond these walls. "Well, damn," Blanc muttered, his drawl thick with delight. "Ain't that a kick in the shins?" The suspects felt the pressure, though they didn't know why. Lunch was a battlefield of silence and stares. Elise pushed Marcus for answers, her voice low but venomous. What calls was Clara talking about? She hissed, unconvinced by his shrugs. Marcus laughed, but his hands shook, spilling coffee. Gregory cleared the mess without a word, his face a mask, though he glanced at Clara once. Too long, too heavy. Nora ate nothing, her fingers tracing invisible lines as if solving her own mystery. Clara met no one's eyes, her calm a thin shell, her accusation against Marcus now a weight she couldn't shake. Holmes and Poirot crossed paths in the hall, their findings aligning slowly. Holmes shared Elise's financial tie, a motive for murder or attack. "She's no victim," he said, voice flat. Poirot countered with Marcus's cracks, his muddy shoes, his weak denials. "He runs from truth," Poirot noted, "but Clara runs faster." They agreed both were key, but the landline call, the blackmail, those were blanks they couldn't fill. Blanc joined them late, hands in pockets, his smile easy. He didn't mention the audio or the call log, not yet. Instead, he tossed a curveball. "Y'all ever think Victor might have dug his own grave?" he asked, watching their reactions. Holmes frowned, recalculating. Poirot's moustache twitched, intrigued. The police captain, haggard now, demanded updates. Holmes laid out Elise's money trail, precise as a scalpel. Poirot wove a tale of fear and lies, pinning Marcus and Clara as frayed threads. Blanc, last as always, gave a lazy nod. "Truth's like a bad guest, Captain. It's here, just waiting to make a mess." The captain stormed off, but the detectives lingered, each sensing the shift. Holmes saw a pattern, Poirot a motive, but Blanc saw the whole damn web. Blackmail, calls, lies, and he was already pulling it apart. The Manor's clocks ticked louder now, counting down to something inevitable. Elise glared at Marcus. Marcus dodged Clara. Clara watched Gregory. Gregory served in silence, and Nora drew alone. The truth wasn't hiding anymore. It was standing right there, waiting for someone to blink. Chapter 8. The trap is set. The 6th day at Ravenwood Manor felt like the calm before a reckoning. Victor Langston's murder, now a week unsolved, had woven a web of lies that choked the air. Elise's attack and Victor's blackmail scheme had exposed motives, but the killer remained a shadow, slipping through every net. The 5 suspects, Elise, Marcus, Gregory, Nora, and Clara, were unravelling, their glances sharp with distrust, their words brittle. Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot stood on the edge of truth, but only one was ready to pull it into the light. By evening the manor would hold its breath no longer. The suspects were frayed threads, scattered across the manor's grand hall under police watch. Elise, her arm still bandaged, clutched her father's journals, her ambition now tinged with paranoia. She trusted no one, least of all Marcus, who she glared at across the room. Marcus leaned against a pillar, his charm a ghost, his denials about late-night calls sounding hollow even to himself. Gregory moved with quiet precision, serving coffee, his face a mask of duty, but his hands steadied plates with a force that betrayed him. Nora sat hunched over her sketches, her pencil scratching out jagged lines. Doors, eyes, knives, as if her art could name the guilty. Clara, her alibi shattered, was a coiled spring, her eyes darting to exits, her locket abandoned, her silence no longer calm, but desperate. The manor pulsed with their fear, and something had to break. Sherlock Holmes was a man possessed, his logic stretched to its limit. The financial trails, cigar stub, and Elise's coded memos pointed to a conspiracy. But Marcus and Elise weren't enough. Someone had moved the knife. He turned his attention to the study's lock again, examining its gears under a borrowed police lamp. A faint scratch inside suggested a tool, not a key, but no tool had been found. Frustrated, he pivoted to the attack on Elise, retracing the library scuff mark to a servant's passage nearby. He set up a watch there alone, convinced the killer would return. Mistakes followed pressure, and pressure was all Ravenwood had left. Holmes didn't trust Blanc's tech tricks or Poirot's hunches. He trusted evidence, and he'd stake out every corner to get it. Hercule Poirot saw the end game in human cracks. The blackmail scheme had clarified motives. Elise's greed, Marcus's betrayal, Nora's grudge, but Clara's accusation and Gregory's silence gnawed at him. He gathered the suspects for another round of questions, his voice soft but unyielding, like a blade wrapped in silk. Elise admitted arguing, with Victor over control, her tears bitter. Marcus confessed to skimming deals, swearing it wasn't murder. Nora rambled about Victor's cruelty, her hands shaking, her story circling nowhere. Clara, cornered, hinted at knowing Victor's enemies, but named no one, her eyes flicking to Gregory. Gregory himself was stone, claiming only loyalty, but Poirot caught a pause when asked about the study's key. He planned to shadow Gregory, certain the butler's calm hid a storm. The truth, Poirot felt, was in their silences, and he'd listen until it spoke. Benoit Blanc, though, wasn't waiting for confessions or clues to align. The smartwatch audio, the call log, the hacked lock, they all screamed intent, and Gregory's steady presence was starting to look too perfect. The butler had access, motive. Victor's blackmail hit everyone, even staff. And opportunity, with no gaps in his timeline that didn't bend under scrutiny. But Blanc didn't want guesses. He wanted proof. He returned to Echelon's control room, the manor's digital heartbeat, and hatched a plan. The blackmail folder named Gregory in a buried note. Victor had docked his pension, a quiet betrayal for disloyalty. Small, but enough to burn for years. Blanc grinned, his mind alight. "Time to stir the pot," he said, his drawl thick with mischief. He coded a fake message, mimicking Victor's blackmail style, and fed it into Echelon's system. A text to all suspects' phones, sent from an untraceable manor line. "I know what you did. Study, 8 p.m. Simple, vague, designed to spook the guilty. He rigged Echelon to broadcast the study's audio to a hidden police receiver, every word live. The police captain, sceptical but desperate, agreed to stand by. Blanc didn't tell Holmes or Poirot, not out of spite, but because their methods were too slow, too loud. He needed the killer to move, and move now. As evening fell, the suspects got the message, their reactions a study in guilt. Elise read it and froze, her journals slipping to the floor, her eyes wide with fear. Marcus laughed, but his hands shook, his gaze darting to the study door. Gregory's face didn't change, but he set a tray down harder than needed, his breath catching. Nora gasped, tearing her sketch, whispering about traps closing. Clara read it twice, her jaw tight, then slipped to her room, as if to hide. Blancy watched from the hall, casual as ever, sipping tea he didn't taste, his mind on Gregory's flinch. 8 o'clock came, and the study was dark, its broken door ajar. Holmes, unaware of the trap, waited in his servant's passage, eyes on the library. Poirot shadowed the hall, watching Gregory's rounds, his notebook ready. But Blanc's plan was already in motion. Gregory slipped into the study alone, his steps silent, his face no longer calm, but taut with purpose. He whispered, thinking no one heard, "You're dead, Victor. You don't get to win." The words hit Echelon's mics, clear as day. Then a confession, soft, raw, final. "I had to stop you. The money, the lies, it was enough." He'd used a maintenance tool to jimmy the lock, stabbed Victor, hid the blade in a vent. The attack on Elise was a warning. She'd been too close to Victor's files. The police, tipped by Blanc's receiver, swarmed in, catching Gregory mid-sentence, his hands empty, but his guilt loud. Elise gasped from the hall. Marcus swore. Nora stared. Clara exhaled like she'd known. Holmes burst in, furious at being sidelined, his stakeout useless. Poirot followed, his pen still, his face a mix of respect and frustration. The captain cuffed Gregory, barking orders, his relief palpable. Holmes laid out his cigar and scuff clues, proving Gregory's access. Poirot added Gregory's pause, his loyalty a lie. But Blanc, leaning against the wall, said nothing, just nodded, his trap sprung clean. The manor exhaled, its secret spilling. Gregory's head bowed, his confession complete, but questions lingered. Why so desperate? Why now? The truth was out, but its roots ran deeper, and Blanc's eyes said he wasn't done. Ravenwood wasn't finished telling its story, not yet. Chapter 9. The Motive. Unravelled. The night of the 6th day at Ravenwood Manor was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that followed a storm. Raw, uneasy, full of echoes. Gregory, the butler, sat in cuffs, his confession still ringing in the grand hall where Victor Langston's murder had finally found its answer. The locked room puzzle was solved, Elise's attack explained, but one question lingered like smoke. Why? The 5 suspects, Elise, Marcus, Nora, Clara, and now Gregory himself, were a broken circle, their truths laid bare under the gazes of Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot. The manor demanded closure, and it would have it one way or another. The suspects were gathered in the drawing room, their faces a gallery of shock and relief, though none felt clean. Elise clutched her bandaged arm, her ambition dulled by betrayal. She'd trusted Gregory, called him family, and now he was a killer. Marcus stood apart, his charm a memory, his eyes hollow as he grappled with how close he'd come to blame. Nora sat on the floor, her sketches scattered, staring at Gregory as if he were one of her drawings come to life. Flawed, final. Clara, her alibi long shattered, was calm again, her silence now heavy with understanding, as if she'd seen this end all along. Gregory himself looked smaller, his posture no longer rigid, his hands folded in his lap, waiting for judgment. The police stood guard, their tension easing, but the air still crackled. Truth had a weight, and it wasn't done pressing down. Sherlock Holmes paced the room's edge, his mind retracing every step, the cigar stub, the scuff marks, the financial trails. They'd pointed to Marcus, then Elise, but Gregory's access had been the missing gear. Holmes had found the murder weapon after the confession, tucked in a kitchen vent, a slim knife, wiped clean but bearing traces of Victor's blood. It matched Gregory's maintenance toolkit, confirming his method: a rigged lock, a quick strike, a hidden blade. The attack on Elise fit too. Her digging into Victor's files had spooked him, and the statue was a desperate shove to slow her down. Holmes laid it out for the police captain, his voice clipped precise, but a flicker of irritation crossed his face. He'd been close, so close, but Blanc's trap had beaten him to the punch, and that stung more than he'd admit. Hercule Poirot sat near the suspects, his notebook closed, his eyes alive with reflection. Gregory's confession had tied his threads. Loyalty turned sour, a pause that hid rage. Poirot had seen it in the butler's flinch, his overdone devotion, but he'd chased Clara and Marcus too long, misled by their cracks. He spoke softly to the captain, weaving a story of human failure. Gregory's silence wasn't duty, but a mask for pain, and the attack on Elise was fear, not calculation. Poirot's little grey cells had mapped the heart of it, but mapping wasn't catching, and he knew Blanc's speed had won the day. He glanced at the southerner, his moustache twitching, not with envy, but with a quiet nod to a game well played. Benoit Blanc stood by the fireplace, hands in pockets, his calmer, contrast to the room's churn. Gregory's confession was his doing, sprung from Echelon's trap, but it was only half the story. The smartwatch audio, the call log, the blackmailed files, they'd led him to Gregory, but the why was personal, not digital. He'd gone back to Victor's records after the sting, pulling a staff file buried in the cloud. Gregory's pension cut wasn't just a slight. It was revenge. Victor had blamed him for a leak years ago, a family scandal that cost Gregory's sister her home, her health, her life. Victor docked his future, called it justice, and Gregory carried that wound silently, serving the man who'd ruined him. The blackmail scheme was the final straw. Victor's threats named Gregory, promising exposure for old sins, and the butler snapped. Blanc stepped forward, his drawl steady, cutting through the room's haze. "Gregory, you didn't just kill for money," he said, not unkindly. "You killed for a hurt that never healed. Victor took more than your pay. He took your kin, didn't he?" Gregory's head lifted, eyes wet, and he nodded, voice barely a whisper. "She was all I had. He didn't care." The confession deepened. Victor's cruelty, the sister's collapse, years of swallowed rage. The study was Gregory's chance, the lock his skill, the knife his release. Elise's attack was panic, not plan. She'd been too close to Victor's secrets, and he couldn't risk her finding the truth. Elise gasped, her journals falling, her voice choked. "You served us all this time?" Marcus swore under his breath, his own guilt forgotten. Nora's pencil stopped, her eyes on Gregory, not judging but seeing. Clara nodded faintly, as if she'd known pain like his, her silence softer now. The police captain listened, stunned, as Gregory's motive painted a man not evil, but broken. Holmes added the knife's proof, his tone flat but certain. Poirot spoke of loyalty's shadow, his words weaving grief into reason. But Blanc stayed quiet after his question, letting Gregory's truth fill the space. He didn't need to say more. His trap had caught the act, and his insight had caught the soul. The suspects were left to process, their own motives now irrelevant but raw. Elise faced her greed, Marcus his betrayal, Nora her anger, Clara her secrets. They weren't killers, but they weren't innocent. Gregory sat still, his confession complete, his burden lighter, but his fate sealed. The manor seemed to sigh, its walls no longer hiding but watching, as if satisfied. The police began their paperwork, the captain barking orders with new energy. Holmes and Poirot stood aside, their clues correct, but their timing off, their respect for Blanc unspoken, but clear. Blanc slipped to the hall, his work done, but his mind still turning. Gregory's pain was the key, but Victor's cruelty was the lock, and Ravenwood had been the stage. The truth wasn't just a name, it was a story, and Blanc had read it faster, not because he was smarter, but because he listened to what machines and men both said. The manor was quiet now, but its echoes would linger, and Blanc knew every house like this had more to tell. Chapter 10. The Legend of Benoit Blanc. The 7th day at Ravenwood Manor dawned with a stillness that felt earned, like the world catching its breath after a long fever. Victor Langston's murder was solved, Gregory's confession and motive laid bare, a tale of betrayal and revenge that left the manor's walls quieter, if not cleaner. The suspects, Elise, Marcus, Nora, Clara, and the now cuffed Gregory, were no longer players in a game, but people picking up pieces of lives they'd nearly lost. Benoit Blanc, Sherlock Holmes, and Hercule Poirot stood at the case's end, their work done, but the echoes of their clash lingered. Ravenwood was ready to let them go, but not without a final word. The morning was crisp, the manor's Gothic spires softened by a rare sun. Elise sat in the drawing-room, her journals packed away, her ambition tempered by truth. She'd inherit Victor's empire, but its shadows would follow her. Marcus lingered in the hall, his deals exposed, his charm useless. He'd leave Ravenwood, diminished, a man who dodged a noose, but not his conscience. Nora gathered her sketches, her wild eyes calmer now, as if naming Gregory's pain had grounded her own. Clara, her secrets half spilled, was already planning her exit, her locket back in place, a reminder of battles she'd fought alone. Gregory, in a holding room, awaited transport, his face not defiant, but resigned, his story told. The police bustled, their relief palpable, tying up reports with a haste that bordered on joy. Sherlock Holmes stood by the manor's entrance, his cape folded over one arm, his mind already elsewhere. The case was closed, knife found, lock explained, motive clear. But his pride bore a bruise. He'd traced the cigar, the scuff, the finances, each a step toward Gregory. But Blanc's trap had outrun him, a fact he couldn't quite shake. He spoke to the captain one last time, his voice steady, detailing the evidence chain. Fibres to Marcus, redirected to Gregory, memos to Elise, a red herring, the vent's blade, the final proof. The facts were always there, he said, more to himself than anyone. He glanced at Blanc, leaning nearby, and offered a nod, not warmth, but respect, the kind forged in defeat. Holmes was a man of logic, and logic demanded he acknowledge the better play, even if it stung. Hercule Poirot, ever composed, lingered in the parlour, his notebook tucked away, his moustache immaculate. The case had tested his little grey cells, Clara's lies, Marcus's cracks, Gregory's hidden rage, and he'd seen the shape of it, but too late. His timeline caught Gregory's pause, his loyalties lie, but Blanc's sting had turned suspicion into certainty faster than Poirot's questions could. He approached the captain with a quiet grace, summing up the human thread. A butler broken, by loss, a murder born of pain, an attack fueled by fear. The heart betrays itself, he said, his accent soft but sure. To Blanc he offered a smile, slight but genuine, and a single word, formidable. Poirot knew a master when he saw one, and Ravenwood had crowned its king. Benoit Blanc, true to form, was unbothered by the weight of victory. He stood on the manor's steps, fedora tilted, hands in pockets, watching the police vans roll in. The smartwatch, the call log, the hacked lock, the AI trap, they were tools, not trophies, and he'd used them to hear what others missed. Victor's greed, Gregory's grief, a manor alive with data and despair. He didn't gloat, never his style, but his eyes sparkled with the joy of a puzzle solved clean. The captain, shaking his hand, stammered thanks, still dazed by the speed of it all. "How'd you know?" he asked. Blanc chuckled, his drawl warm as whiskey. "Captain, folks leave trails. Phones, locks, lies. You just gotta listen where it's loudest." The suspects emerged one by one to face the day. Elise met Blanc's gaze, her nod curt but grateful. She'd lost a father, but gained a chance to rebuild. Marcus avoided him, his ego too raw to face the man who'd seen through everyone. Nora paused, offering a sketch, a rough outline of Blanc, fedora sharp, eyes kind. "You saw it," she said, voice low, and he took it with a grin. Clara stopped longest, her locket glinting, her words careful. "You're dangerous," she said, not unkindly, and Blanc just tipped his hat. Gregory, led to a van, said nothing, but his glance at Blanc held no hate, just acceptance, like a man who'd finally exhaled. Holmes and Poirot joined Blanc on the steps, the trio a study in contrasts, logic, heart, and instinct, bound by a case that had pushed them all. They didn't speak of it, didn't need to. Holmes adjusted his cuff, ready for London's next challenge. Poirot polished his cane, his mind already on a new mystery. Blanc, though, lingered, his gaze on Ravenwood's fading silhouette. "Y'all, the truth's just a click away." he said, half to them, half to the air, his smile a promise of more to come. Holmes snorted faintly. Poirot's lips twitched, and they parted. Not friends, but equals, each carrying a piece of Ravenwood's lesson. The manor stood empty as the vans pulled away. Its secret spilled, its story done. The police would write reports, the press would scream headlines, and Victor Langston's name would fade. But Benoit Blanc's wouldn't. He'd cracked the case faster, not because he was cleverer, but because he saw the world, tech and tears, locks and loss, as one big messy truth. Ravenwood had been his stage, and he'd played it like a song. As the sun climbed, Blanc climbed into his car, tossing his coffee cup onto the seat. He didn't look back, didn't need to. The next puzzle was out there waiting, and he'd find it, same as always, with a wink and a hunch. Ravenwood Manor closed its doors, but the legend of Benoit Blanc was just getting started.